A bill to be entitled Faithful Article 5 Commissioner Act, the General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
The gentleman from Alamance, Representative Riddell, is recognized to debate the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Friends, what you have before you is Faithful Article 5 Commissioner Act. In our Constitution, there are two paths to make amendments to the Constitution. The first one, and one used mostly through our nation's history, is Congress proposes an amendment. It goes out to all the states. If 3/4 of the states, that would be 38 today, approve of the amendment, and it becomes part of the Constitution as if it were part of the original law. Well, there's also a second means, a second path of making amendments. It's not something gets a lot of attention these days, but it needs to, because the founders put in place what they call a what they did was create a path for the states to be able to offer amendments. They would propose a convention to propose amendments. Now, get the language straight. It's not a convention that makes amendments. It's not a convention that produces amendments that are immediately become law, but simply a convention to come up with amendments, proposals. Those proposals then would go to the states, and if 38 states, 3/4, approve of the amendment, then it becomes part of the amendment, part of the Constitution, as if it were an original document. So what we have in North Carolina, and we have done, is years past, we have approved various conventions of the states. The most recent one being last year, when a proposal came out from the House and the Senate to enact term limits on federal officers. Now, we've already been down this road of doing the Article 5 convention, and it's been worked successfully. It's worked the way the founders determined it should. Where we are now with the Article 5 Faithful Commissioner Act is we have no guidelines for who's a commissioner, how do you become a commissioner, how do you become a part of this Convention of States proposal. So what is in this bill are simply a collection of guidelines. I went to other states and looked at what they had done, what they had brought into their state for this preparation to become part of a convention of states. So that's what you have in this bill. It gives some stipulations as to qualifications to be a commissioner, how it goes about. There's a oath that is taken to prevent anybody from going astray in the Convention of States, and some other matters. And what I would ask is for you, you looked it over, you think it's a good bill, I appreciate your green vote.
For what purpose? The gentleman from Beaufort, Representative Kidwell, rise.
Speak on the bill.
Gentleman's recognized to debate the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fellow representatives, the current Constitution has been in effect since 1789. 1787 is the last constitutional convention that was convened. There have been no additional constitutional conventions under Article 5. There have been meetings of states. There's been ideas, but we've not had a convention. We've amended the Constitution after the first 10. We're now at number 27, I believe. We've amended it 17 times since the original. Some of those took quite some time to actually get passed. Herein lies the problem. When we talk about binding a delegate, Article 5 of the Constitution outlines the conventions. It's 143 words. It does not say even who the delegates might be. Congress in 1921 wrote their own book on how this would happen. And I can assure you it still sits on the shelf up in Congress waiting for them to have the opportunity to amend or radically rewrite the current Constitution. As far as binding somebody, Chief Justice Warren Burger, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States said, and I'm quoting, "Nobody tells a constitutional convention what to do. Its power to propose amendments are unlimited." I think he probably knew the Constitution better than any of us in this room. So for you to think that we can send somebody to Washington, D.C., or wherever this convention ends up being, because that's not defined either, and that you can bind them to a certain set of ideas and rules, no, you cannot. Look at Article 5, guys. You could read it before we take the vote. 143 words. Blow it up to a 16 font, doesn't even take up a full page, and I can tell you I can read that in less than 2 minutes. I encourage you, do not convene a constitutional convention. Don't
Mr.
attempt
Speaker.
to do it.
1 second, Representative Kidwell. For what purpose, the gentleman from Guilford, Representative Blusterized.
See if Representative Kidwell will yield to a question.
Representative Kidwell, gentleman yield.
I yield.
He yields.
Representative Kidwell, I'm just wondering, I don't know myself. I've heard what Justice Berger has said. I've heard that before. Was that said, written in a specific Supreme Court opinion, or was that just something he said in a speech?
Representative Bluss, I wish I knew the answer to that. I can only tell you it was his words. I don't think that we actually have faced, that I'm aware of, and I'm not an attorney, let's start with that. I am not aware of any cases where there's been a contest of whether or not a constitutional convention could, should, or would be convened. So I don't believe that that would have been in a court ruling. I think it would have been his opinion, just like Anton Scalia's opinion, who was another very learned attorney, and he felt it was one of the largest dangers to this country. In fact, his words were, "This isn't the century to do a constitutional convention." So I'll speak to that more later because there's another bill coming in reference to that. But again, I'm going to go back to, there is nowhere in the Constitution that says you can bind a delegate. I think everybody in this room has been to a convention at some point or another. Once they figure out that they have a quorum, that they have the set number of delegates in that room, the first piece of business is to take the proposed rules and decide whether or not they're going to abide, adopt, void, or rewrite those rules. Have you been to those conventions? They hand you a rule book, and you decide right then and there, are we abiding by these rules? Or somebody can stand up and say, "Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we throw that rule book in the trash and start over." You cannot prevent that. When you give them the power to go amend this document, it is not a limited power. It is unlimited. I'll speak again more to that later. I encourage you, do not open this Constitution to a rewrite, because when you do that, you might not be happy with what comes back. You think you're unhappy now? And I'll turn to the folks on this side. You'll be way less happy if they change substantially what we do. We'll talk more about the actual document itself in the next bill. Thank you.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Wake, Representative Sheets will rise.
To speak to the bill.
Gentleman's recognized to debate the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the body for your consideration. Just want to respond to a couple of comments that were just made. Again, I think a lot of this will come up when we debate the resolution that follows. But regarding the font of power for the states to bind their delegates, respectfully, I disagree with my colleague that there's no power among this body to do this. And I'll specifically direct you to the 10th Amendment, which states that if the federal government has not been delegated the authority to do something, and it hasn't been expressly restricted to the states or prohibited to the states, that the state has the authority to do it. Now, the gentleman says, well, you may not like what comes back. They may throw the rule book out. That's true. There are other checks on that. We still have to have 38 states that would ratify whatever came out of that convention. We'll get into that later, but just specifically, the constitutional source of the authority to do what this bill proposes to do is the 10th Amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion or debate? Seeing none, the question for the House is passage of House Bill 214 on second reading. All those in favor will vote aye. All those opposed will vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock machine and record the vote. 61 having voted in the affirmative and 53 in the negative. House Bill 214 having passed its second reading without objection. Be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Question before the House is the passage of House Bill 214 on its third reading. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Bill 214, having passed its third reading, will be ordered sent to the Senate. House Joint Resolution 379. Clerk will read.
Representatives Riddell, Setzer, Blust, and Sheetselt. House Joint Resolution 379, a joint resolution applying for a convention of the states. The House resolves, the Senate concurring.
Gentleman from Alamance, Representative Riddell, is recognized to debate the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Friends, what you have before you now is the exact same resolution that was approved by this body in the 21-22 session, as well as the 23-24 session. We can make this 3 in a row tonight with your help. It establishes the path that we mentioned earlier of a convention of states to propose amendments as a way of bringing change to the federal government. You'll find that there are 3 sections or 3 segments in this proposal, this resolution, that again would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, would also limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and limit the terms of office for its officials and members of Congress. That sets the agenda for any convention of states. Thus far, 19 states have signed on to this very same wording. And that's a critical part of the Convention of States process. You have to have the same subject matter, the same wording to reach the 34 state threshold wherein then Congress is triggered to enact a convention of the states for proposing amendments. So I want to address something that you'll hear a little bit about, maybe preemptively, about a runaway convention. There are some people who mistakenly believe that the original Constitutional Convention in 1787 was a runaway because what came out of it was a new constitution. So how do you decide if the delegates exceeded their authority or not? Well, in the words of James Madison in Federalist Essay number 40, you go and you look at the charges that they were given. You go to look at what the states told their delegates to the Philadelphia Convention that became known as the Constitutional Convention. As you look through those calls, those directions from the states, 10 of the 12 members who attended, 12 states who attended the convention in Philadelphia, had given to their delegates plenary authority to do whatever was necessary to help the exigencies of the moment, basically the crisis that they were in of having too weak of a central government. So the Convention of States and the idea of calling a Convention of States that came out of Congress tells you that this is a legitimate process. And what they did was ratified by the necessary 9 states, eventually all 13, and we became the United States of America. All right. Now, you'll hear something about a runaway convention. I don't want a runaway convention. Jay Adams, you want a runaway convention? Anybody over on that side of the aisle want a runaway convention? Anybody up in the gallery want a runaway convention? Where is this runaway convention? It ran away. There is no such thing. The convention is bounded by its own authority because its Congress is not running the convention of states. That's the wonderful magic of it. You see, friends, we have a charge. We here serving as state legislators, we have been given a wonderful charge by our founders and by the people who sent us up here. And the charge is to help the national government stay on track. $36 trillion debt. That's what we have right now. I encourage you, might be disheartening news, but go to thedebtclock.org and look up the debt of the national government currently right now. You'll find that it's about $36,212,437,637,000 plus change, changing every 10 minutes. Okay. We cannot continue to spend ourselves stupid like this and expect good results. There has to be a restraint upon spending from the federal government. Now, this is a bipartisan issue. This is not a Democrat issue. This is not a Republican issue. This is a bipartisan American issue. Do we spend ourselves stupid? Do we spend ourselves into such a monstrous debt that our children are left to pay it off? $36 trillion. You know, in 2020, the amount was $24 trillion. So we have added another $12 trillion in 4 years. That is unsustainable. Well, the charge we have as state legislators in Article 5 is to call the Convention of States to propose amendments to impose fiscal restraint upon the federal government, because they obviously are not going to do it themselves. But we have that power. We have that authority granted in Article 5 of the original Constitution to do that Convention of States. 36 trillion. 1 million seconds was about 11 days ago. 1 billion seconds is about 32 years ago. 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years ago. We are on a path that cannot be sustained. The federal government does not seem capable of enacting the changes necessary. And this is where we come in as legislators. This is where we answer the charge. Either with a yes, we'll step up, we'll do the right thing, we'll call the Article 5 Convention of States to propose amendments, or we'll just sit by the sidelines and watch our country go in the dumpster financially. That's a terrible legacy to leave to our children and our grandchildren. So I would encourage your support. 19 states have already enacted the language for the Convention of States. It would be wonderful to have North Carolina become the 20th. We get it passed here in the House, it has to go over to the Senate. And when the Senate ratifies it, we would become the 20th state. Still a long way away from the 34 states that are necessary before Congress is enacted to call the convention. The Congress's role in all of this is ministerial. They call the convention, determine where it's going to be, and then the convention takes hold. One thing we have lost in our culture is the idea of what a convention of states is. There were numerous conventions of states in our country before the Constitution was enacted in 1789. There were several. Remember back to your history class, the Stamp Act Congress. The colonies assembled themselves in convention to protest. Think of the First Continental Congress. The colonies again called themselves into a Congress to oppose some of the things that were being done to them by England. The Second Continental Congress. And then between the Second Continental Congress and the Constitutional Convention of 1789, there were about, I think, 14 other conventions that were held. While this may seem a strange concept to us today, it was very common back in the day when the Constitution was written and the Convention of States opportunity was written into it. So I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have. I would encourage you to vote for this joint resolution, just as we've done in the previous 2 sessions here in North Carolina. Thank you.
For what purpose, the gentleman from Beaufort, Representative Kidwell, will rise.
Speak on the bill.
Gentleman is recognized to debate the bill.
Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, fellow representatives. We've spoken about this many times in the past. Here we are again today. 19 states have signed on to this. That means the vast majority of states have not. Why? Because it's not a good plan. Madison himself, and I'm glad my fellow representative brought it up, Madison himself said it was not a good idea several times, including, and I quote, "Naturally, the convention would consider itself to have greater latitude than the Congress." He also said it would give greater agitation to the public mind. He further said we would court the most violent partisans on both sides. Ladies and gentlemen, when they wrote this Constitution, they were not in the situation we are today. A united country who had just fought for its freedom from a tyrannical government came together to bind themselves into one United States. It absolutely could not happen again. Look at the countries where they've tried to mimic what we did in the United States. You look at our Constitution. There it is. When they've tried to rewrite these in other nations, massive books consisting of thousands of pages. Ours was written by the average person who came together and felt that it needed to be something that was able to be read by farmers and the common man. We know today from what we do here, that would be impossible. We can't even write an agency bill that's less than 50 or 60 pages. And we're going to write a new constitution that's concise, meaningful, and deliver the impact that this Constitution, the greatest document that has ever been written outside of the Bible, ladies and gentlemen, this document birthed a nation that became the greatest power on the planet, the greatest economic engine on the planet, the greatest freedom on the planet. Why would you want to alter that? It throws me back to the days, and you're all going to love this, of George Bush. When George Bush stood there and said, we need a new world order. All I could think about is, what's wrong with the world order we have now? It's pretty good. America's up here. Everybody else is below us. They can't outproduce us. They can't outfight us. They can't outdo anything that we do. They don't out-freedom us. And we want to change that. So the big thing we always talk about when we talk about constitutional conventions is term limits. A lot of people don't realize, they'll say, well, the founding fathers didn't think about that. Ladies and gentlemen, the Articles of Confederation had term limits. Our founding fathers found them wanting because each of us, as we walk through that chamber door for the first time, would be a lame duck. If you announce today you're not running for re-election, you're a lame duck, aren't you? You can't get much done. That's exactly what happens no matter how long the term limits are, because your opponents simply have to wait you out. They know in 5 years, 10 years, whatever the number is, you're going to be gone. You want to stop the runaway spending? Do the same thing we need to do in this very building. Elect better representatives. Couldn't tell you how many times I have stood at Republican conventions and I am told, why can't you guys do X, Y, or Z? My answer, some of you might not like this, you need to send better Republicans. Now, y'all might want better Democrats, and I get that. But that's how you make the change. You change the guard. To my friends on this side, I'm often asked, well, how do we get rid of Nancy Pelosi? Do you think California is going to send you a better Nancy Pelosi? Seriously? Not going to happen. You want to stop the spending problem? Stop sending people to elected office who want to do nothing but spend your money. Send people who are going to vote no against tax increases and additional spending. Runaway convention. Can't happen. That is so bogus, it's ridiculous. Scalia said you can't stop a convention from doing whatever it wants. Berger said you can't stop it. Madison said we would find they had more power than Congress. Think about that. Because Congress has really made a mess of things. You want to fix this problem? We can propose amendments. That can be done. It's been done. Contrary to us having other constitutional conventions, that's not even possible. We might have had other conventions. We had colonial conventions. We had conventions in Williamsburg. But we couldn't have had a constitutional convention because we didn't have a constitution. So anything that happened prior to 1787 was not a constitutional convention, by definition. Please take deep consideration into what you're doing, because you're taking this wonderful document and you're changing it into Pandora's box. And once you open it, you will not be able to close it. It will be subject to the whim of whoever those delegates are. And the 10th Amendment, by the way, does not speak to the 5th Amendment, or to Article 5, rather. It does not speak to Article 5. It does not put any limits on convention. It says the powers not granted to the federal government in this document remain the rights of the states and the people respectively. It does not say a word about a constitutional convention. So we don't know exactly how that's going to go. I'm trying to appeal to the sense of well-being that this nation truly has. One nation under God. And I don't think we should alter that. Now, I'm going to speak directly to my Democratic friends. Ladies and gentlemen, here's what I can promise you. I am 100% against opening that Constitution. But you vote today to do that. And I will run harder than I've ever run. I will raise more money than I've ever raised. I will fight like a pit bull in a pen to make sure that I am the delegate from the great state of North Carolina. And if that doesn't make you all vote no, nothing will.
For what purpose, gentleman from Wake, Representative Sheets will rise.
To speak on the resolution.
Gentleman is recognized to debate the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to draw your attention to one thing our colleague said just a few minutes ago, that times have changed since 1787, and they sure have. Everything that came after that for probably the next 3 or 4 minutes was pure fiction. The Constitution was not birthed by a people that felt particularly united following the war, which ended several years before that. And as you mentioned, we lived under the Articles of Confederation. America was a nation that was being torn apart. It was a nation that was fledgling. It was a nation that was being circled by vultures, by the world powers that were eager to pick the meat off the bones when the experiment failed. But times certainly have changed since 1787. America is far from being that fledgling nation. America is now the world's superpower, as I'm glad my colleague recognized. We're bound by treaty to protect about 3/4 of the world's population. The states depend on each other. We are economically interdependent. All of these things are practical reasons why I don't fear a runaway convention. I think a little bit more highly of my fellow man, I guess. I do think Representative Riddell brought up some interesting historical points, and I want to raise one historical story that's fairly well known from the Virginia debate on ratification of the Constitution that was proposed in 1787. At that meeting, Patrick Henry stood up and delivered an impassioned speech against the ratification of the 1787 Constitution. He said, "I feel it, I see it, I see beings of a higher order that are very nervous over what we are doing here. I fear that if we open this door," and I'm paraphrasing now, "if we open this door, horrible things await us." And thankfully, the delegates in Virginia did not listen to their esteemed colleague. They voted in favor of ratifying the new Constitution. That document has done more and the amendment process outlined in Article 5 has done more to advance human rights than just about any other document in human history going back to at least Magna Carta. There is no denying the challenges that we face. A constitution that, a framework that emerged post-Revolutionary War. A 14th Amendment, 13th and a 15th Amendment as well, that emerged following a nation that had been ripped in half by war. The most recent amendment to our Constitution, the 27th Amendment. It's an excellent story. If you're not familiar with it, I would encourage you all to look it up. Because that 27th Amendment had originally been proposed in 1789, and there was a young student, I believe his name was Gregory Watkins, somebody can check me on that in 1982 wrote a paper about how this is actually still a live amendment. That the act that proposed it didn't put a date on ratification. It did not have to be ratified by a certain date. He got a C on that paper, and it irritated him. And he spent the next 10 years of his life setting out to prove that professor wrong. And his efforts resulted in the ratification of the 27th Amendment. His teacher went back and changed his grade to an A+ several decades later. So the reason I bring that up is because Congress has not shown any appetite to reform itself. The federal government has not shown any appetite to reform itself over the last half century. And the world has changed. The circumstances have changed. $36 trillion in debt has changed. And we're no longer spending our tax dollars. Our federal government is spending the tax dollars of our children, our children's children, our children's children's children. And that is not a sustainable path. I may be opposed to whatever would come out of a convention of states, but I'm at least willing to have the conversation to see if we can do something to correct the ship before it's too late. And for that reason, I urge your support for this resolution. Thank you.
For what purpose? Gentleman from Alabama, Representative Riddell rise.
Speak briefly a second time on
Going
the
to
bill.
recognize to debate the bill a second time.
Friends, I just want to share with you one little quotation here because I think it's germane to what we're talking about. This is how it reads. It says, essentially what I've said is that there is some risk of an open convention, even with respect to the limited proposal of financial responsibility at the federal level. I think that risk is worth taking. It is not much of a risk. 3/4 of the states would have to ratify whatever came out of that convention. Therefore, I do not worry about it too much. I really want to see the process used on a serious issue so that the shibboleth about the end of the world can be put to rest and we can learn how to use the process responsibly in the future. All of that referring to an Article 5 Convention of States from former Chief Justice Anthony Scalia. Please, colleagues, remember your charge and vote green.
Further discussion or debate? Seeing none, the question for the House is the passage of House Joint Resolution 379 on its second reading. All those in favor will vote aye. All those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the vote. Clerk will lock machine and record the vote. 62 having voted in the affirmative and 51 in the negative. House Joint Resolution 379 having passed its second reading and without objection will be read a third time.
The General Assembly of North Carolina enacts.
Question for the House is the passage of House Joint Resolution 379 on its third reading. All those in favor will say aye. All those opposed, no. The ayes have it. House Joint Resolution 379 having passed its third reading will be ordered sent to the Senate. Members, will move back up now to House Bill 188. House Bill 188, clerk will read.
Welcome, Convention of State supporters. My name is Andrew Lusch, and welcome to this edition of COS Live. You have been watching House debate in North Carolina. They were debating HB 214 and HB 379, our 34 ready legislation, as well as our Article 5 application, which would call for a convention of states under 3 topics, limiting the size, scope, and jurisdiction of the federal government, instituting term limits, and reining in spending in Washington, D.C. Both passed the second and third reading. So that means that our Article 5 legislation and our 34 ready legislation, legislation that puts parameters on a convention and the delegate selection process, all of that now goes to the North Carolina Senate. So we went through the House. Now we're over to the Senate. This is going to be the last chamber. It'll have to go through the same process, go into a hearing, and then onto the Senate floor for debate. And if it passes in the Senate in North Carolina. That will mean North Carolina will be state number 20, and it will join the 19 other sister states that have passed our Article 5 application. So we might have the regional director, Grant Martin, who oversees North Carolina, in just a few minutes. If he's able to come on camera with us. He is at the legislature right now, so he might not be able to join us. I will point out, as we wait to see if he can join, there was limited debate in this floor, or in this House floor session. There was only 2 people that stood up. There was Representative Kittle, and he was in opposition to 34 Ready. He was in opposition to our Article 5 application, and he said all kinds of lies and misfacts and misrepresented Article 5 in the founding. And Representative, I'm going to get it wrong, Sleetsel, he stood up and he countered every single misdirect and misinformation that Representative Kittle talked about. And the one line that really stuck out to me was what the good gentleman said was complete fabrication. And I just love that. Completely shut it down. We also heard from our sponsor in the House, Representative Dennis Riddell. He gave great testimony on why we need to pass this, urging his colleagues to vote yes, that we have out of control spending and an out of control Congress, and that we need to rein in the federal government if we are going to preserve this nation for future generations. So, Producer G, do we have Grant Martin ready? Is he able to join us? Looks like we don't have Grant Martin, so I'm not sure if we're going to get him today. The good news is we're now going on to the Senate. Half the battle is won. We have to go on to the Senate now and work our legislation through the process there. And if we're successful in the North Carolina Senate, we will have state number 20. One last thing that I'll point out before we close out tonight. This is the 3rd time that the North Carolina House of Representatives has passed the Convention of States resolution. So it's great to see that the House is still in strong support of our resolution. They're still in strong support of using Article 5 to correct an out-of-control federal government. Our hope and prayer is that the Senate side sees the same urgency and that they do the right thing. They stand up and vote in favor of our resolution. All right, well, we'll have to wait till next time, and we'll get Grant Martin to talk about the victory here in North Carolina, and hopefully we'll be talking about the victory on the Senate side as well. Until then, we've got a country to save, so it's time to get back to work. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you around next time.